Okay, so the webinar is now being recorded, and we're going to do, as I mentioned, a real quick overview of frevvo and talk about a few examples of business problems that customers are solving with frevvo. Then primarily jump into a demo, and we should have some time for questions. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. In your GoToWebinar panel, there should be a question section. You may know how to have all of these sections in here, but you can type your answer, type your question in there, and my colleague Courtney Bernard is here with me. She'll try and answer the questions as they come in, and perhaps reserve some for later when we have a Q&A at the end of the session. So with that being said, really quickly, what does frevvo do? Frevvo is point-and-click software. The intention of the software is to allow our customers to design any form and automate any approval workflow in just a matter of days. It's very easy to use. Many customers have successfully automated their workflows and managed to get their first workflow running in as few as 10, 15 days. It's very, very fast. And these aren't just simple contact forms. These are real complex workflows with dynamic behavior, conditional routing, and so on and so forth. So we'll be going through some examples of that as we go along. We have a number of customers, well over 800 customers at this point. You see a number of names here that I'm sure you recognize. Customers come from all verticals. We have a number of universities like NYU and Syracuse you see on there. Customers all over the world as well, from European Union, Australia. We have a number of customers using frevvo in a variety of languages as well, including right-to-left languages like Arabic. So customers are spread out all over the world in all kinds of verticals. We also have a number of very small companies, by the way, that are frevvo customers as well. So our customers range all the way in size from 15 to 20 person organizations to the US Army, which is about as big an organization as it gets. What are they using it for? Here are some common examples. There's a wide variety of things that people use the product for, but some of the most common things are really everyday workflows and processes within your organization, like a purchase order, where, let's say I want to buy something for the company. Typically, I fill in a form, and in many cases, this is an Excel spreadsheet, or in some cases, even a paper form. Fill in the items that I want to purchase, and then there's some sort of approval process associated with it. So perhaps it routes to my manager, and then if the amount is greater than $5,000, it routes to a vice president, and so on. Say amount is greater than $25,000, it's got to go to the CFO. And finally, after all approvals are completed, maybe it goes to the purchasing department to actually buy the product, and then finally to finance for recording or coding the PO. So that's a really common workflow. Another real common example is travel authorization, where travel authorization is pretty simple. I'm going to a conference or on a business trip, and I need to get my travel either pre-authorized, or perhaps I want to file an expense report after my travel has been completed. So expense report is another example. Actually, employee onboarding, I can't believe I didn't put that on there. Employee onboarding is a really common example as well, where when you have a new employee joining your organization, it's really common for the employee to have to fill in a number of forms. Today, these things are often done on paper, and employees often have to fill out dozens of forms in some cases that we've seen. And a lot of the information on those forms is duplicated. So you're filling in the same information, your first name and your last name and your social security number, and you're signing multiple forms. So with frevvo, you can make everything into a nice, seamless, automated workflow where there's no duplicate data entry, there's validation, and then eventually the right PDFs, custom documents are generated, such as W-4s or a government I-9 that may be required as part of that employee onboarding. So there are a large number of example workflows. Another, well, I guess it's on the next slide here. So one of the other things also is integration. So frevvo also does a great job of being able to integrate with things like SQL databases, being able to write your documents to SharePoint or other electronic document management systems. It integrates with your Active Directory or LDAP system for authentication, so you don't have to create your users again and roles, put them into groups again. We also support SAML for single sign-on. We talked about generating PDFs. frevvo supports a number of secure digital signatures, 2 types of signatures as well. Automatically works on mobile, supports accessibility requirements as well. The workflows themselves also allow you to do conditional dynamic routing for approvals, support escalations and reminders. So if somebody doesn't respond or approve a workflow in a certain amount of time, they get reminders, obviously notifications as well. And then frevvo also delivers very rapid positive ROI. We do have an ROI calculator on our website, and you can, it's at frevvo.com/ROI calculator, and you can customize this form with your workflow and get an approximate ROI for your particular approval process. So as I mentioned, the focus of this particular webinar is dynamic forms. So we have a number of situations where customers use frevvo for dynamic forms. In fact, I would say that practically every single customer of frevvo uses the dynamic behavior of the product extensively. So let's take a look at that. We're going to show you a number of demos, but really quickly, what are some of the examples? So we're going to go through 6 or 7 examples here. Initializing today's date. So it's a very common use case. I'm filling in a PO or an employee onboarding or a travel authorization or whatever business process. You practically always have a date field that says, what is today's date? So there's no reason to make the user fill that out. That's something that can be easily automated, and the form will automatically fill in today's date. And we'll see how to do that without your needing to write a single line of code. Another common example is initializing user information. So since you're logged in, whether it's through Active Directory or directly through frevvo, or you can log in using your Google account, we already know from your login who you are, your first name, your last name, your email address, and in many cases who your manager is. So we can route the approval to your specific manager automatically. So that's an example. We'll also take a look at how easy it is to initialize a frevvo form with these fields without your having to type them in. Another example is something pretty simple. It's just a function concatenating your first name and last name. So a good example where this is useful is if you have employee onboarding documents that generate a government W-4 or a government I-9. So if you look at a government W-4, it just has a field called name, and you need to type in your first name and your last name, the full thing. No reason to make the user do that. Since we've already collected your first name and last name, we can generate the full name for you and then map that into the PDF. Subtotaling rows in a table in a purchase order or an expense report. They're another really common requirement. I've got a table. I'm filling in some line items. I need to calculate subtotals. I need to calculate a grand total. We're also going to take a look at showing and hiding fields. This is one of the most common pieces of dynamic behavior in frevvo forms, and one of the nicest things where we only show on the form things that the user needs to see that are relevant for the particular person who's using the form at this given time. And then similarly, workflow routing as well, where again, we'll show you an example where we are routing to a manager and then to a VP, but in the requester or the employee phase where I'm the first person filling out the form, I don't even see the sections for manager and VP approval that are not relevant to me. The visual rule builder is very powerful. It has a large number of built-in functions. Here's a non-exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea, there are a number of things related to users, conditional things, if a field is filled, if a field is empty. You can also perform a number of calculations like sums and maximums and minimums and averages, and also a few things that are date related that are very common to use as well. If you're familiar with Excel or Google Sheets or functions that are commonly used in spreadsheets, these should be really familiar to you. And then finally, there are also expressions that you can create in the visual rule builder. We'll take a look at a couple of examples of these also. It's very common to multiply things, add things, concatenate things, check if something is either equal to or greater than or less than, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy, pretty simple stuff that everybody is pretty familiar with. So with that being said, let's jump into a demo. So I'm going to log in to my account on frevvo's servers. dismiss this chat here, and we've got the Visual Rule Builder webinar. So I've got a number of forms here that I have created in advance that go through these common scenarios. So let's start with the one we talked about first, today's date. How do I create a form and put a date on it? Well, the date is really simple. You simply drag in a date field like this, and you call it, you give it a name. Oops. You can just call it today, or this one it happens to be called today date. So we've got a field in here called today date. And what we want to do in this case is we simply want to initialize the form, initialize this particular field in the form automatically with today's date. So we click this button here to access the rules. So this is a button in the toolbar. So you can see here that I've already created a rule called set today's date. So let's delete this rule so I can create it again. Okay, so to create a new rule, you simply click plus and a new rule will be added. You click on the pencil over here to edit the rule. So let's set it to set today's date automatically. And then there are two options here, the rule builder and the rule code. So this is one important thing to remember here. Some of you who are familiar with frevvo know that it supports writing these rules in JavaScript as well. So the rule builder is a visual way to create some of these most common rules, but we have not taken away the ability to create these JavaScript rules. So you can still go into this rule code over here and click this edit code button, and you can write your JavaScript rules using the familiar mechanisms that you are already used to. And then there are some examples, some situations where the rule builder just cannot create the necessary rules. For example, when you're integrating with a third-party system and you need to communicate with a web service and process the data that's returned that's very custom to that web service. So you can always write JavaScript for these rules. Your existing rules that are written in JavaScript will continue to work, no problem whatsoever on that front. But now we're going to run the rule builder. So this is a wizard. In this case, there are two real mechanisms, I guess, in which rules run. One is an initialization rule, and then some rules have conditions. We'll get to the conditions in a minute here, but in this case, we're going to check this initialization rule. So what this means is that we want this rule to run automatically when the form is initialized. It's initializing the form. So as soon as the form loads, we want this rule to run. And what do we want the rule to do? Well, we're going to select the field. We got a field called today date, and we're going to set it to. And what do we want to set it to? Well, we want to set it to today's date. And if you look back at that list of functions, there's a function called today. So you'll see again, as you start typing in here, there's an autocomplete feature that shows you which functions match whatever you happen to be trying to do. So I'm going to just click on today, and you'll see we're setting today's date to today, and that's it. We can click next. Obviously, since there was no condition, there's nothing to be false, so this rule will always run when the form is initialized, and click finish, and that's it. So you can see the rule builder down below here is showing you that this is an initialization rule, and it's going to set today's date to today. If you click on this rule code tab, you can also see the JavaScript code that's been generated. In this case, it's really simple. If form.load, set today's value, the date value to the current date. We don't need to worry about this JavaScript when we're using the rule builder. So now we can try this out. I'm going to click this little magic wand over here called the Save and Test button. I think it's a magic wand. And you can see here exactly what happened. When the form was loaded, it automatically, this rule ran and it automatically initialized it to today's date. Now, even though the rule was generated using the Visual Rule Builder, when you're testing in this Debug Console that, again, some of you may be familiar with, the same information is displayed that used to be displayed if you wrote the rule in regular JavaScript. So it's telling you what happened when this form was initialized. Now, again, this Debug Console is only visible in this test mode. When the form is deployed to your production, whether in a space or if you use a link to make it available to your end users, this Debug Console will not be visible. But it's telling you, here's the rule that ran. It was triggered by form.load. Here's the actual rule, set today's date, and then it's telling you what it did. It set the value of the today date control to today's date. This is the 17th of May. I hope that's right. It is the 17th of May. So that's that. That was really, really simple example to start with. All we did was we have a single field on the form, which is a date, and we initialized it to today's date. The next example we're going to go through is this user details. So now we've got a few more fields on the form. We talked about how it's really common to want to have a form which has your first name, your last name, and your email address, and in many cases your manager, if that information is available to frevvo for the purposes of routing. Again, there's no reason to have the user type this in. Of course, it's easy. As a user, I can type in my first name and last name and email address. But since I'm logged into frevvo and the system knows it, why not automate that? Eliminate errors, reduce the amount of typing that the user has to do. So once again, click on this rules tab. So we still have that today date rule in there, and we still have that today date control. So what we're going to do here is each of these forms will build upon the previous one and add some more rules. So this is the rule for setting the user details. So the rule has already been created over here. So I'm just going to click on this button here. Again, there's no when condition. It's an initialization rule. So as soon as the form loads, we want these fields to be populated. And those fields are really simple. All we're doing here is setting the first name to user first name, last name to user last name, email to user email, and manager to user manager ID. So let me delete one of those and add it just so you see how it's done. I can click this add action button here to add something new. And we're going to have set the field manager. What do we want to do? We want to set it to something. To. And what do we want to set it to? Once again, as you start typing, you can see how the system is narrowing the list of choices available to you to match whatever you've typed. So in this case, we're going to we're going to set it to the user's manager ID. And that's it. So we're setting these 4 fields automatically. Really nothing difficult that the user had to do to initialize these fields. Again, if you look at the rule code, you can see that this might be familiar to people who have written these kinds of rule in the first place in earlier versions of frevvo, where we're just generating the code behind the scenes that does exactly what we want, takes the actions that we want to take here. Let's try this out, and what we should see here is that the date was initialized and the first name, last name, email address, and manager fields were also automatically initialized. So what you can see here in this debug console is it ran 2 different rules. This one was setting, so there are 2 rules there, today's date and user details. The console is showing you that it set today's date to today's value, and then it ran the other rule which set the first name, last name, email, and manager value to the values that it retrieved from the login user information. So that was those were 2 pretty relatively similar and pretty straightforward examples on how you can initialize fields in the form with information that the system already knows, either the date or based on the logged in user. This is a slightly different example, but again, pretty similar. Again, we've got those fields today's, the date and the user fields in here. But what we want to do now is generate a full name. So we just want to concatenate the first name and last name and generate a full name. Remember, I mentioned to you that there are many examples, many situations in which this is very useful. So a good one is a government W-4, which is expecting a name. So how do you do that? Very easy in frevvo. All we're going to do is set the full name to first name with last name. So let me create this rule again. So I'll remove this one. Click plus in here. So let's say set full name. And I'm going to click run builder. So in this case, there are no conditions at all. We always want to run this. It's not really an initialization rule, and there's no condition under which we could add a condition when the first name is filled and the last name is filled, but we don't really need to in this case. So what we're going to do here is set full name to, and in this case now we're going to use an expression. So if you looked at the list of expressions here, there's a concatenation function, and it uses the operator plus, the familiar operator. So what do we want to concatenate? First name and last name. So let's start typing first name, and you'll see that first name is available here as an option. You click plus and last name. So this will concatenate the first name and last name. And of course, in most real world use cases, you want a space in between, so you can just put in a space as a string, concatenate first name plus space plus last name. Again, there's no false condition, so there's nothing to do in here, and click finish, and that's all there is to it. When I try to test this out, you'll see that the full name will automatically be initialized to the concatenation of first and last names. If I change this to something else, you'll see that the full name updated instantaneously to the concatenation of the first and last names. And once again, the debug console is showing you the 3 rules which ran. So again, this is a simple example of dynamic behavior, but very, very common use case that customers use all the time. So now we're going to move to a somewhat different kind of rule. This one is going to be triggered based on actions that the user takes in the form, instead of being triggered automatically when the form initializes. So this is again a super common example. Think about expense reports, timesheets, travel authorization, purchase orders. Very common to have a table. I've got a description of, let's imagine a PO here. What are you ordering? What's the quantity? What's the unit price? And therefore a row subtotal. So the row subtotal is the quantity multiplied by the unit price. And again, there's no reason to have the user compute those things like they might have to do on paper or on Excel. You'll notice the table has these plus and minus buttons, so you can always add a row to a table. You can, or you can remove a row if necessary. How do we write this rule? Well, we use the visual rule builder again. Now think about, another thing to think about here is also, since this is a table and it can have any number of rows, if you wrote this rule using code, using JavaScript or some sort of programming language, you would have to write a loop of some sort and go through array indices. So I've got quantity 1 multiplied by unit price 1, quantity 2 multiplied by unit price 2, etc. And of course, you only want to perform the calculation when there are actual values and not for blank rows. So see how the visual rule builder makes this completely trivial. So let's delete this. I'm gonna create this rule again from scratch. So again, I'm gonna click plus over here. I'm gonna say calculate subtotals for each row. Subtotal for each row. And we're gonna click on this run builder. Now this is an example when we do want to add a condition. So we only want this rule to run under these 2 conditions: when unit price is filled and what's the other field? Quantity, and when the quantity is filled. So what this basically means, when a user has entered a valid value in unit price and quantity, we want this rule to run under those conditions. You'll see down here there's a logic expression. You can certainly click edit here and edit this expression, so you could put a 1 or 2, or you could create some sort of complicated logic expression if you had a number of conditions in here. In this case, we don't really need to change this. We want to run it when both 1 and 2 are true. So we're going to run this when unit price is filled and quantity is filled. What do we want to do? Well, it's pretty simple. All we want to do is set the subtotal to and we want to set it to an expression. So the subtotal is the product of the unit price. So type in unit price and multiply by quantity. So easy as that. No loops necessary. You didn't have to worry about the index in the table, which ones are empty versus not. You don't have to do any of that stuff. The system automatically generates all of that for you. And then in the false case, we don't strictly need to do something, but I like to dot my I's and cross my T's. So what we're going to do here is set the subtotal, to empty. So what we've done in this rule is, again, really simple. We're saying when the unit price is filled and the quantity is filled, set the subtotal to their product, otherwise set it to empty. Again, if you look at the rule code that's generated behind the scenes here, you'll see that there's a for loop behind the scenes. It's doing all the checks for you. It's setting up the necessary indices into the table rows and doing the computation automatically for you. But you don't really have to worry about any of this stuff. It was really easy to do in the visual rule builder. So I'm going to click this button here again to try it out. And you'll see here now that we've got the first few rules ran automatically to create this. And now as we start typing in here, let's say I'm going to order some red widgets, and how many of those do I want? I want 111 of them, and they cost $13.77 each. And you'll see how that subtotal is automatically computed. 10 of those, but each one is much more expensive. And you'll see again how that subtotal is computed. Remember how we had that else condition? If I remove a unit price, the subtotal will disappear from there, indicating that, look, I can't compute a subtotal because you only specified a quantity. I need an actual price for the item as well. So it's really easy to compute these line items, these kinds of computations in tables with the Visual Rule Builder. Relatively sophisticated functionality that you can do without really needing to know for loops or JavaScript and how to write ifs and conditions and all that kind of stuff. So now that we've got a subtotal, the next very easy thing is, of course, we want a grand total. And the grand total is simply going to sum all these subtotals in here. So as you can imagine by now, it's very easy to do in frevvo. And this is a particularly easy rule to write. So let's delete it and create it again. In here, and this rule is there's no condition, and all you got to do is set the grand total to. And now this is I think the first example perhaps where we're using a function. Oh, I guess we used it in today and user information, but this is an example of a function that takes a parameter. So we want to set the grand total to the sum of something. What do you want to set it to the sum of the subtotals? So start typing subtotal in here and close that brace, and that's it. All we have to do in this rule is say we want to set the grand total to the sum of all the subtotals. Click finish, and that's it. A really simple rule. But you can see again behind the scene there's a lot of complex functionality being generated. Because if you think about it, the grand total needs to be updated when a user enters a quantity and a unit price and a new subtotal is computed. Also needs to be updated if a row is removed, for example, from the table, or an item is added to the table. So these are all situations that are just automatically handled for you by the rule builder. So let's click the little play button there and try it out. We'll see that when we type 7, you'll see how that grand total got updated automatically. And now if I were to remove this row, again, you'll see how the grand total automatically gets updated. I can click plus here. I can type something different, and the totals automatically get updated. So this is another great example of functionality that's super common and that's made really, really easy using frevvo. But again, behind the scenes, there's quite a bit of relatively complex stuff that's going on that thankfully we don't have to worry about when we're designing these forms. Okay, so we've gone through initializing forms with a date, some information that's pre-filled based on the user's login. We've done some calculations like concatenation, subtotals, and grand totals. So we're now going to move to a different type of rule. We're not actually computing anything or updating any fields, but what we're doing now is turning to a different scenario where we want to conditionally show or hide parts of the form. So this is, again, a really common example. So again, I've got the same form up there, but now I want to say, what is the payment method? And if the payment method is a check, then we want to display this message control as to checks payable to frevvo, blah, blah, blah. But if the payment method is credit card, then we want to display this credit card section and hide the check section. So you'll see that the credit card section, if I select it, that visible flat checkbox is unchecked, which means by default, the credit card section is going to be unchecked. The check payable message is visible, and the payment method is set to check by default. But what we want to do is, depending on which one you select, I want to show or hide one or the other. So let's take a look at that rule. So we're going to say show hide check credit card info. And this is, again, a really simple rule. Let's take a look at it. So when the payment method is set to check, This really thing should be on the side here. This is a bug just in my Firefox on our cloud. I don't know why. We're looking into it. I think my Firefox is zoomed. Anyway, so the condition is when the payment method is check. What do we want to do? When the payment method is check, we want to set the check message to visible and the credit card section to hidden, optional, and then we want to empty out the credit card holder name and email fields as well. So really easy. Again, let me delete a few. Let me delete this credit card section as optional. So all you got to do is select what you want, the credit card section. What do I want to do? Hidden, right? Set it as hidden. So that's all you got to do. You just have to select the actions that you want to take for that particular section or control in the pick list on the side. I want to set the credit card section to hidden and optional, and I want to null out or empty out the credit card holder and email fields if the user happens to have typed anything. What about when if you remember, the condition was the payment method is check. So this is what we want to do when the payment method is check. What do we want to do when it's not check, when it's credit card? Well, we want to do the opposite, essentially. We want to hide the check message, and we want to make the credit card section visible. And of course, we want to make it required so that the user has to fill in the fields in the credit card section, which is that first name and email address. So let's give that a shot and see how it works. Click this button, try the form out. Again, you'll see now that we want to type, let's put in something in here. We've got a subtotal and a grand total, and you'll see by default the check payment method is selected and the check message, please make check payable to frevvo, is visible. If I select credit card, you'll see how the credit cards, the check message was hidden, the credit card section became visible, and these fields are now required. If I type my name and email address in here, now if I go back to check, say, I think I'll just pay by check. What it did is it hid that section, but it's also removed the values from those fields as we had specified. So again, a simple, easy example of showing and hiding sections and fields within a form depending on actions that the user takes in the form. Now, this show hide functionality can be as complex as you want. You can show and hide large sections or entire tabs in the form, or a dozen controls if you want, based on a single action within a single group. So really, really common behavior, really common dynamic behavior, I should say, that customers use in our product as well. Okay, so what we've done here is we've looked at in here a number of examples. We've initialized a few controls. We've shown you how you can concatenate, calculate subtotals and grand totals. We've shown you how to show and hide fields in the form. The last example here that I want to look at is now applying this to a workflow and how you can show or hide approval sections within the workflow, make them required or optional within the workflow, but based on what step in the workflow you're in, as opposed to something that the user has done in the form. So this is a three-step workflow: requester to manager to VP. Okay. The VP step, by the way, in this case has a precondition, which you can look at over here. And this is another thing that's done using the same rule builder. In this case, the precondition will run when the grand total is more than $5,000. So very similar to the rule builder, except there are no actions. There's just a condition. The condition panel of the rule builder behaves in exactly the same way. You can set a condition when the grand total is more, whatever. You can set any condition you want in here. Okay, pretty simple, I would hope. But we're going to edit this requester form. And you'll see that we've now organized the form slightly differently. We've put the date, first name, last name, etc. in a requester section. You'll also see in here that the label of this section is set to requester, and then there are a couple of values here in curly braces, first name and last name, and these refer to these controls, first name and last name. And you'll see how we use this, another example of no-code dynamic behavior in the form. The label of the section will change to automatically reflect the first name and the last name that are entered into the form. And as we go through this workflow, you'll see how we change the way these workflows work so that the appropriate sections are visible, but also these sections will appear collapsed. We'll see that as we go along. Now, we've got the order items. Again, we put this into a section in here. We put a template in here, $grand total, so it's easy to see what the order is for. We've also added a sign this section a button here, and that's basically select this section and we select the security tab, and you'll see that we've just selected a text signature image and click the must sign button. When you click must sign, that button turns red, indicating that a signature is required. And this is an example of a digital signature in the form. You'll see when we use it, I'll sign it as a requester, and then when it goes to the manager step, every field in here is automatically locked. And it's because we want the manager to only either approve or reject the order, but not make any changes. The changes should only be made by the original requester. Now, the other thing we've done here is we've added two sections, one called Manager Approval and one called VP Approval. Both of these also have these security sections with the signatures. The VP one has a wet signature, and we'll just see when we run what's the difference between those two. So what we want is the Manager Approval and the VP Approval sections to only be visible when we're on that particular step of the workflow. So how do you do that? It's easy. You use the visual rule builder. So you can see there are the rules that we had used earlier, today's date, etc. And we've added a number of rules, actually 5 of them, to control what is visible on each step of the form. So there's the rule for the requester step, the manager step, the VP step, and then we've got a couple of other rules, which is I want some stuff to happen on or after the manager step. So we'll see what that means in a second here. So let's take a look at this rule on the requester step. So how do you do the condition when current step is requester? So let's just do that. And current step is, and you can select a step, requester. So you also saw how when I deleted this, the condition, the rule builder gave me an error. Well, look, this rule is not valid. You can't set a, that's because we have a false, we have some actions that are set up in the rule for the false side. And of course, you can't have a false action unless you have a condition. So let's put that condition back in. And current step is requester. So what do we want to do when the current step is requester? Well, we want to set the requester and orderized item sections to expanded. Otherwise, we want them to be collapsed. Pretty easy. And those are the two big sections at the top. Remember, I mentioned to you when we go to the manager step in the approval workflow, we want to automatically collapse those. So that's a simple one. What do I want to do on the manager step? Well, on the manager step, it's very similar. When the current step is manager, we want the manager approval to be expanded and required. Otherwise, we want it to be collapsed and optional. Trivial stuff, as you can imagine. When you're on the manager step, you need to make sure that the required controls in that manager approval section are indeed filled in by the manager. And of course, when you're not on the manager step, you don't want to prevent the form submission because those controls are not filled in, so you set those as optional. Straightforward. The VP step is basically identical on the current step. When the current step is VP, we want to set the VP approval to expanded and required, otherwise collapsed and optional. And then the last thing here is the on or after the manager step. What I want to do is when the current step is on or after manager, I want to make the manager approval visible. Otherwise, I want it to be hidden. So what this does is before the manager step, when I'm in the employee on the requester step, the manager section will not be visible because I'm not on or after the manager step, so it'll be hidden. But when I'm on the manager step or any subsequent step, so whether I'm on the manager step or the VP step, the manager approval section will be visible. So the VP can already see what did the manager, if the manager typed in any comments, did he or she approve it, the VP can see that. So again, really simple stuff. And again, the on or after VP step is basically identical. So it's a very common pattern. You'll find yourself using these patterns within frevvo workflows to just show and hide relevant sections of the form. So while there are a number of rules in here, each one is really simple. It's completely visual. There's nothing, no coding required, and nothing for you to do in terms of writing rule code or JavaScript code. And the system will automatically, if you go change the name of the step from manager to something else, the system will automatically take care of that for you. Let's give it a shot, try it out. Hopefully it'll work correctly. So you'll see here how the requester, the dynamic label that we had set is automatically set to the first name and last name. In this case, now I've disabled the first name, last name, email fields. I've hidden the manager field because we don't need to show that. The full name field, these are all automatically generated, so we don't need to type those in. I'll type in a description, a quantity, a price. You'll see how that grand total in there updates in the label as well. Oops. It updates down here, but it also updates in the label. That same dynamic behavior is visible here. I must sign this section. You see this thing is red in here. If I try to click send to manager now, it's going to complain and say you've got to sign this section. So that's another example of how frevvo will make sure that you can't make a mistake in these forms. And these errors that often result in going back to the original person, hey, correct this thing, are just automatically handled. So when I click sign this section, you'll see how the first name and last name and today's date, these things were auto-signed, automatically generated. This is a secure digital signature generated behind the scenes. All the controls are now grayed out and the values cannot be changed. So now I'm going to click the send to manager button. And in this particular case, for demonstration purposes, we're not actually routing to the manager. We're just going to show it instantaneously. And you'll see how the first two sections are automatically collapsed. So the manager section, the manager only sees information that's most relevant. This manager approval section, if you recall on the previous step, it was not visible. No need to show it to the requester because it's not relevant to his or her actions that are being taken in there. As the manager, if I want to take a closer look at these, I can always expand this. I can take a look. Oh, you're ordering red and blue widgets. Seems okay. I can't make any changes in here because this section is locked by the digital signature that was applied on the first step in here. In the manager approval, all I can do over here is say, looks good. We need this stuff. I'm going to click sign this section and click approve request. And in this case, what you'll notice is that the VP section was skipped. And that's because the grand total in there was, I think it was $1,900 and some dollars, which is under the $5,000 threshold that we set in the precondition for the VP step. Just to make sure that I'm not full of it. Sorry. If I try that again and I type in something larger in here, so the amount is greater than $5,000, sign this section, send it on to the manager, and click sign this section again. Now when I click approve request, I should see that it routes to the VP, and that's because the VP, the amount is greater than $5,000, so VP approval is required. And again, you can see how the form has dynamically adjusted so that the VP sees the manager approval step, can expand it and say, what were the manager's comments? Can't make any changes in here, but can approve it. This one is a wet signature. I forgot about that. So quickly, when you click on the sign this section behavior here, you see how a box pops up, and I can sign it here. It's really simulating a wet ink signature that you might use on a piece of paper. Whatever you do in there is automatically copied in here. It's very easy to use, in particular on a touchscreen device, because you can sign this with your finger on a touchscreen device. Click finish, and the request has been approved. So that's those were some examples of very common dynamic behavior that a lot of customers use in our forms. Examples I showed you so far have all been related to using the visual rule builder. I did mention earlier that we also have, you certainly have the ability to also use JavaScript and do more sophisticated integration. I'll give you a real quick look. You can see these on our website under Get Help Examples. So here's an example of dynamic customer information. So this is a very dynamic master detail type of form. And in this case, this is coming directly from a SQL database. So this form is integrating with an actual live SQL database in the background. This pick list was automatically populated from that database. The list of customers is obtained from the database and it's rendered in the pick list. When I select a customer, frevvo is going to make a call to the database, get the customer details for that particular customer, and populate the entire section down below. Select a different customer, and you'll see how the list of how the detailed information automatically updates. Another cool thing about this is no code required to do this kind of really complex dynamic behavior. And then the last thing in here also was we can also integrate pretty easily with things like Google Apps or Google Sheets. We have a number of customers who use Google Sheets. Google Sheets, Google Apps, and using Google logins has become very popular and very common use case. You can sign in to frevvo automatically using your Google account, but you can also create forms and flows that integrate with your Google Sheets. So let's see, do I have a, use this example? I guess that's the only one I have here. So let's give this a shot. You can look at this Google Sheet in here, and you'll see that depending on which school site is selected in the form, the principal, the validator, and the approver fields are different people. So let's make a note that for Central, it's Walter Hagen, What's Done, and Alexa Sterling. When I click this Get from Google link, firstly, this list of school sites is populated from this sheet. So you will see this list of school sites in the form in this pick list. And when I select, I forget which one I said, Bernardo, you see that the principal, validator, and approver name are the same as the ones in this spreadsheet. If I select a different list of a different department, different school site, I should say, you'll see that it goes to the sheet and dynamically updates it immediately to get the information from that Google Sheet. So this is a more complex example of dynamic behavior. It's actually integrating with a third-party system and updating your form with information from that third-party system. There's a lot more that you can do in terms of dynamic behavior. For example, you can create frevvo forms that update your database. You can create frevvo forms that take your submission and create a new customer in QuickBooks, or a new lead in Salesforce, or a variety of create PDF documents, as I mentioned, government W-4s, I-9s, etc. And you can you can store those documents into a variety of backend systems like a Xerox DocuShare or a SharePoint system, or even your Google Drive. So that was a quick introduction to dynamic behavior at frevvo. There's a lot of information on our website. There are a number of video demos. We go to our website under Get Help. It's pretty much consolidated under Get Help. There are examples. There's videos, number of videos in here. There's one, in fact, on this visual rule builder. Help and training. You can sign up for training classes, chat with us online. There are webinars, tutorials, ebooks, and infographics, and of course, our support site and forum. So thank you again for listening. I did want to make sure we have a few minutes maybe for some questions, if there are any. So I'll ask Courtney, are there any questions to answer?
Would you go over in the rule builder how to set multiple conditions? Just how to edit that condition screen?
Sure.
And then also, what happens if there's you mentioned that if you change the name of a step, you don't need to edit the business rule, but what happens if you edit the name of a control? What does that look like in the rule builder?
Sure. Okay, let's take a look at this. So the question was, can I go over the multiple conditions example in here? So I'll just make something up in this case. So let's go in here when the payment method is a check, and let's add a condition. This is a bug in my Firefox. I apologize. But we've got a couple of conditions here. So let's say when the payment method is checked, the first name is filled. You know what, let me do this. So when the first name is filled, hang on. I'm going to start from scratch here. This condition, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to say, I'm just going to make something up, okay? when the first name is filled, or when the grand total is more than, oh, this is annoying, more than 0, or,
don't forget to toggle that.
Huh? Should I just switch to Chrome? I think I've got a bit of a problem in my.
Well, I just meant to toggle the 0 that you had it set to, not a literal value.
No, I'll just use when grand total is filled.
Yeah.
Or when the, what was the original condition I had? When the payment method. When the payment method is checked. So I've got multiple conditions in here, and by default, we're going to run this rule only when all 3 of these conditions are true, 1 and 2 and 3. But I can change that. Let's say I want to set this up. I want to run this when 1 or 2 and 3. So what this basically means is I'm going to run this when either 1 or 2 are true, when the first name is filled or the grand total is filled and the payment method is checked. So that's how you basically create, you can create any number of conditions, and you can create a logic expression that determines how that group of conditions is evaluated collectively to come up with either a true or a false value for when that rule runs. So hopefully that's clear. I think, was that the question you think, Courtney? Okay, that was the question. Hopefully that was clear. I do apologize. This thing is going down onto the next line just in my my browser on this server. I don't know why. What was the second part of the question?
What happens if you change the name of a control?
That's right. So let's say I change the name of a control. What happens to this rule? So let's go in here and change the name of this control to grand total 22. 22, you'll see in here that the rule builder, the system will automatically inform you that there's a problem over here. This rule is invalid, it's turned red. If you were to try and save this form, it will tell you that the rule is invalid. Oops.
If you go to the rule code,
here, it will show you what the problem is, and you have to select grand total 22 to the sum of subtotal. And click finish, and now the rule has been updated to the proper, to reflect the proper control. So that's how it works. In this case, it's not going to automatically update the rule for you, but it is going to let you know that there's a problem in your rule. Okay?
And then somebody had asked about the cost. If you could just direct them to the
cost
page
of the product?
Yep.
Sure. So we have, you can go to our website and click on pricing here. So the good news is it's very, very aggressively priced. You know, really all of this behavior starts as low as $135 a month for our cloud system. The on-premise system starts at $4,100 a year. We do have both models. frevvo is supported in the cloud in our data centers. Obviously, that's easier for you in the sense that you don't have to worry about upgrades or making sure your data is secure, high availability, all that stuff. We just handle all of those details for you. But there are many cases where customers do require an on-premise system for a variety of reasons. Perhaps you need to integrate with a specific backend system that cannot be exposed to the outside world, or authentication, or maybe there's just a policy within the organization. We do support on-premise software as well. The products are both identical. There's no difference. The exact same functionality is available in both cloud as well as on-premise systems. You can contact us to get a customized quote. If you go to our pricing page and click on this link over here, you'll come to a contact form, and you just fill that out, and someone will get back to you very, very quickly with information on pricing. Okay? All right. Well, thank you very much again. We did go a little bit over. I do apologize for that. And hope you found the webinar useful. A recording will be posted to our website probably by the end of the day today, but certainly no later than tomorrow. Thank you again for attending. Bye-bye.